So our next speaker is Kristin Nuckols. She is an OTD, MOT, OTRL, and co-founder of Imago Rehab. I say all those things because she's very, very qualified. And those letters are very important for our discussion moving forward. So Kristin Nuckols has 14 years of experience as an OT, centered on technology-based intervention with adults with neurologic conditions, including brain injury, spinal cord injury, and stroke. Her passion lies in combining cutting-edge rehabilitation technologies with intensive and robust at-home engagement to drive truly meaningful and long-lasting change in these chronic populations. With 10 years of experience in inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation settings, she became an expert leader and educator in utilization of both low-tech and high-tech interventions. She spent the past 4 years in upper limb robotics research through Harvard University and MGH Institute of Health Professions, as well as completing a post-professional doctorate in OT at Boston University. Her doctoral project was an evidence-based telehealth protocol for adults with chronic stroke. In her latest venture, she co-founded Imago Rehab as clinical programming lead, working with adults with neurologic conditions to use a wearable robotic device in the home and engage in a motivating behavioral program, all from the home setting.
Thanks. Yeah, I realized that I gave such a robust intro, I can pretty much skip my first slide. So thanks again for inviting me to be a part of this workshop and panel today, and to everyone for sticking around for the final presentation. There might be one more. I guess we're hoping that's the last person can make it. So I'm Kristin, currently co-founder of Imago Rehab, and I'm representing the therapy voice on this workshop as an occupational therapist. So like I said, I can pretty much skip most of this, but actually I've been an OT for about 16 years, so I need to update my LinkedIn profile apparently. And I'll just touch a little bit on each of those. I know that they were already described, but I had some unique experiences as an OT that are just a little bit unusual. So the big impact of working in inpatient and outpatient care for those 10 years was that I was lucky to work for companies that promoted the use of high-tech devices and high-intensity techniques. And I'll explain more later how that's pretty unusual. Did anyone notice me in the pictures in the talk that Lucas gave? That was a little bit of foreshadowing that I was also in the Harvard Biodesign Lab, and I worked on the glove project and then also the inflatable upper limb project that he described so well. And then at MGH, yes, I worked in this robot assisted upper limb training protocol using a cognitive strategy, and then finished my doctorate in OT at BU and created an evidence-based protocol using that technique for adults with chronic stroke using telehealth. And then again, co-founded Imago Rehab, which is a seed round startup. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that experience towards the end. So I'm going to start out talking about the neurologic client and what we as clinicians are trying to achieve with them. So let me just give you a little perspective here. This is a client about 1 year post-stroke. She's actually having a pretty successful recovery here. She's well outside the window for spontaneous recovery. You can see this impaired upper limb. This is November, the first time that she's able to actually begin opening that hand. So just barely getting that signal to the right place. Her hand's very tight, difficult to use. A few months later, after some intensive therapy with us over telehealth, she's beginning to get that open and close response, but actually getting to use it for something. You see the right hand helping out. It's not perfect. She can't hold it up in space. But a few months later, we're getting some really useful, practical, real life gains where she can now use that impaired hand to do a task like tie her shoes. So it's clear that a client's motor capacity and performance can change post-stroke. But some of the questions we want to answer are, what's the mechanism of action? How can we make it happen faster? And how can we make sure that change happens for everyone? Oops, let's see though. I've got 2 screens and they're not connected well, so hang on a second. Okay, we did all of our videos. There we go. Alrighty, so the field definitely understands that intensity and repetition are the key to any chance of recovering function after a stroke. So I'm going to talk through two examples in literature that give us an idea about mechanism of action. So on the left, we have a study by Jeffers. This was 2018. They show us an animal model of recovery so that if a rat with a stroke performs 300 to 400 repetitions of reaching or more, we see a functional change in their daily life, indicated by an increase in the number of pellets that can be retrieved successfully. So that number, 300 or more, becomes pretty important in our field. On the right, we have a study by Daly, and they give a great example of humans post-stroke performing intense and highly repetitious therapy protocols. And these participants made enormous gains, over 9 points on the Fugl-Meyer assessment. And I agree with Dr. Lin that the Fugl-Meyer is not a fantastic tool to measure recovery, but it's what we have and it's what is used the most often. So on that assessment, we're looking for the MCID, the range in which we hope to see a functional change in daily life. And that number is 5.75 to 7.75 points. And you can see here on the right, these participants increased by nearly 10 points. So wow, this is exciting data. Something happened here. And if we know that this kind of change is possible, why don't we give this state-of-the-art best practice care to all clients post-stroke? So I'm going to expand on this second figure for a few minutes. Okay. So what was required to make this nearly 10-point change on the Fugl-Meyer? It's down there at the bottom in red, 300 hours of therapy in 12 weeks. So that means these participants got 5 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 months. So how many hours are actually happening in clinical practice? Well, in the US, where I work, the low end of insurance covered visits may only be 30 visits per year or 30 hours. We think about it in hours, which is pretty typical. A visit could be shorter than that even. So 30 hours or less. And if we put those numbers, 30 hours of therapy in a year, in context of the Daly study, many typical American clients would use up all of their therapy sessions by the start of the second week of this 12-week study. And they would be finished with covered therapy for the year. And at that time frame, and with that number of repetition, we would only expect a 0 to 2 point change on the Fugl-Meyer, which is the expected typical change for conventional therapy. So that's what's happening in the clinic. How can we provide state-of-the-art care that might enable better and more consistent recovery for our clients? Well, to get the best outcome, we need to provide way more repetition. Ideally, we could provide that repetition using robots that would help people move more accurately with feedback and with less manual effort from therapists. Speaking as a therapist, that's what I would like. Even better, let's give them home use robots that allow people to get out of the clinic and achieve some of those numbers from home. And just to put some icing on the cake, why don't we give them a therapeutic home robotic program that leads to actual carryover of an impaired limb into daily life? And if we can do that, I think we can achieve the goal. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about an example of what happens if therapy devices are designed in good faith, but without the end user in mind. A few months ago, I participated in a technology hackathon with a university here in Boston, and I got to suggest a piece of equipment that one of my clients might want to use at home. And these were students from engineering, from design, and from occupational therapy. So I felt pretty hopeful that I could get a simple device for one of my clients for free. So I chose them to make a bilateral sander, which is a really common therapy device, not technological at all. It's very simple. They cost about $500 online, so no one can buy these for home, or few people. So I thought they would maybe make this for me real simple. So they spent about $100. Here's their design. Things are looking pretty good. You can remove the lid, add weights. The client just slides the box up and down and can do some basic stretching and stuff for their arms. So we thought this was going to be pretty simple. So how'd they do? First glance, I think we're doing okay. All right, but as we kind of dig a little deeper, we're going to find some problems. First of all, the device was too long. They built it around the length of the dowel straight from the hardware store. So that was 4 feet long. And my client, like myself, is 5 feet long. So you can imagine the challenges here. It was so big that it was really hard to use. So the simple choice just to cut the dowel down to the correct length wasn't taken. All right, so next, the track doesn't slide well. A few reasons. The track and the box are wood and there's just friction between them. Also, the hole on the box was cut in a square just for ease of cutting, and the dowel is round. Okay, next. The handles, as you can see, are rectangular and they are not comfortable. So a user who has a stroke tends to have a very tight affected hand, and involuntarily squeezing a square is not comfortable. And remember, I'm telling her to do 300 repetitions, right? So now she's squeezing a rectangle for 300 reps. Next, the base was not given any friction like rubber feet. So the whole box pushed around when she tried to push it up the track. So did the engineers, designers, and therapy students use it themselves? Did they try pushing it and see that it was going to slide around? Did anyone simulate having a stroke and push with unevenly abled arms? It doesn't seem like it. So lastly, the base was not stabilized left to right, so she was only unable to use it with only the affected arm and had to hold on with both arms for every attempt, which was not the goal. So this is not going well. All right, so luckily, my client is a tinkerer and a MacGyver and was very willing to make a lot of modifications to make this box usable. So she ended up making these modifications with my input. So the size in general, we weren't unable to fix. So she had to put it on a table that was a height that allowed her to use it. The track she greased with soap to make it a little bit more slidey. The handles, she added pool noodles over top of those rectangles so that she was able to hold on for longer. The base, she added a rubber mat and also added a 5-pound weight to make the box not slide around. So, you know, people in the audience might just say, oh, you know, this is like a silly, funny example that's not related to robotics design. And the issue here is that this is a very simple tool that really did not go well when it wasn't designed with the user in mind. So imagine that it had been a robotic device. Imagine it had motors. Imagine it had at least 100 separate components. Imagine it had sensors, a user interface, maybe a reporting tool for the clinician and the user. Maybe it has feedback loops. Maybe it gives implication for guiding a therapy plan. When any one of those design aspects is completed without the clinical or the prospective client voice to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, small decisions can lead to big problems. And those problems might include poor device sales, and if a sale is made, lack of therapist or client adoption of a device. I'll give a little background just on therapy use in occupational and physical therapy. Langen reports in 2018 that 90% of OTs don't use technology when they treat individuals with stroke. And the one reason is a personal preference not to do so. Hughes surveyed OTs and PTs who treat individuals with stroke and found that 50% of disciplines combined do not use technology, despite some of the benefits found in literature. As the next generation of robot designers and engineers, it's our responsibility to ensure that we create devices, and when we create these devices and bring them to market, that we consider the needs and desires of the most important stakeholder, that's the user, in the forefront of the design. The second most important stakeholder is the clinician. I really see us as the gatekeeper to adoption among users. So part of my job in that first hospital setting was reviewing potential capital level purchases of technology devices, and I rejected a lot of offerings simply because they were designed without the clinical voice or perspective, and I could tell that I wasn't going to enjoy using it as a clinician, and my clients weren't going to use them either. So this needs to be a big push by members of this audience to increase access to high quality devices that really have the therapist voice. So if you want If you want devices to be adopted by therapists, you've got to get us involved in the process a lot sooner and let us help you design the devices that we want to use. Like I said, therapists are really the gatekeepers to adoption in the future. So I'll just remind you again of my perspective as an American therapist. Remember those clients post-stroke who only get 30 visits covered by insurance, and they may have to use paid transportation to get to the clinic because many of them don't drive. If the only devices that offer high repetition or successful motor practice are extremely expensive, large, complicated to use, and table or station-based, like you saw in the InMotion robot, most clients will complete their entire insurance-covered rehab experience without experiencing the use of any of those devices. I'll try to speed up a little bit. I know I'm probably going a little over. So that brings me to a brief word about my current work experience, which is co-founder of Imago Rehab. Like I mentioned, the team started out at the biodesign lab at Harvard, which you've heard about a few times during this panel. So all three of our co-founders were from the Walsh lab, including Dr. Walsh as our PI, as well as the CEO, Chrissy Glover, who was a design-based research fellow in the lab, and myself as a clinician researcher. We're currently in our seed round, and we have a core team with 3 arms. We have our business end for fundraising efforts and strategic planning. We have an engineering team working to bring our MVP to market. And lastly, the clinical arm, which I lead, providing services to customers and making input on this UX and UI, among other aspects. And then, as I mentioned before, we have a 4th team whose input we treasure and we solicit frequently, and that is our end users. So at our early stage, we are able to work very closely with our end users, both as prospective clients, and we also speak with clinicians. We have an internal OT team, but we also gather OT and PT feedback from external clinicians. And we seek out both experts in the field to make sure that we're on track with their understanding of what we need to be doing, but we also speak often to those who are inexperienced in technology to ensure that we're able to bridge the gap for those who aren't so familiar with robotics and don't use other technology in practice. And their feedback is really invaluable to our end product. All right, so I want to make a little statement before I show this video. So I'm going to share this video with the disclaimer that it shows a prototype device that is not yet FDA registered. And with his permission, I'm sharing this gentleman's opinion of his experience using this prototype, and I make no claims that it is able to treat or cure disease. You should be able to hear audio.
All right, I've been asked about my hand a lot, and I think one of the biggest things that's gone into it is this robotic glove from Imago that I've been using for about the past 2 months.
All right, and I will pretty much leave it there.
All right,
sorry.
I've been asked about my hand.
Go forward. Yeah, so I'll pretty much leave it there. Thank you for your attendance, and I will welcome some questions if there are any.
Yeah, I will. ask a question. We're a little short on time, so I won't open it up to the audience after this, but again, we can ask more questions during the panel session. So one thing you mentioned was a lack of clinical adoption in the tools that are designed, and clinicians sort of serving as the gatekeeper for that. And so I wanted to ask, what's the primary thing that keeps devices from getting adopted? Is it the ease of use, the price, the effectiveness, or really is it kind of all these things combined? And how do you recommend, in addition to obviously working with clinicians, being successful in this endeavor?
Right. I believe the number one complaint is complexity, that and then robustness. So if a device is, if you have 45 minutes to work with a client and it takes you 30 minutes to get set up on the device, best case scenario, you have 10 minutes for the person to use it. So we talk about repetition, we talk about hours needed. If they need to get 30 hours and now you only have 10 minutes, you're not gonna get the effectiveness that you need. So if a device is complicated, we can't use it. If a device takes too long to put on and set up, we can't use it. So that's really the number one. Cost is obviously important, and that's about access. So only the biggest and best hospitals are going to be able to buy these type, the big station-based $150,000, $500,000 robots. So that's an access problem. So we're talking about cost, and then we're talking about complication.